Okay, so we did the clean vehicle credit. I'm Olivia.
I'm Drew.
I'm Adam.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Pam.
And I'm Colin. So just to start, there's two components to this credit. There's a $3,750 credit that applies to the qualified vehicle that satisfies a domestic test for critical minerals in the battery, and then a $3,750 credit that applies if the vehicle satisfies domestic content tests for the battery components, and this is a maximum of a $7,500 dollar credit.
Okay, so we decided to interview some stakeholders for the clean vehicle tax credit. First was Callie and Dan Venuti. They're a married couple and they recently purchased an electric vehicle. They've leased electric vehicles in the past and they support the overall purpose of electric vehicles.
The other interviewee that we interviewed was my dad, Troy. He's in the market for a new car currently, and in the past he's been against EVs due to their high initial cost.
Okay, so we asked the Venutis and Troy some questions regarding their prior knowledge of the tax credit and also some questions just generally about how the clean vehicle tax credit could potentially influence their buying behavior when they're going in to buy a car and their experience buying an electric vehicle. Okay, so some of the key points from the questions that we asked them from Callie and Dan, they mentioned that they knew about the tax credit prior to purchasing their electric vehicle because they had leased vehicles in the past, and their buying behavior was influenced at the point in which they purchased their electric vehicle because the person that sold them the car was able to take the credit with their down payment on the car, and this they consider to be a good incentive for purchasing the car, and they overall felt satisfied as buyers and as taxpayers. And they also mentioned that they would definitely consider the credit being a good incentive to purchase another electric vehicle in the future. And just also noting briefly that they do care more about the sustainable components to electric vehicles and the purpose of the credit being for the environmental's well-being more so than the credit itself.
So when I asked my dad about the credit, he said he has heard about the credit in the past, but he doesn't know about the new form of it. So I informed him on that information that we talked about in the opening slides. He said that the possible $7,500 in tax credit is obviously nice, but it doesn't move the needle too much when buying a new car. He said maybe a higher amount, which he mentioned around 10 to 12K would be a good amount that would make him move towards an EV instead of a regular car, or using a larger percentage of the car's overall value. And he said that he doesn't know how much this incentive will have an effect on people because people are set in their ways and they're not going to make a really large lifestyle change with adding chargers and electricity costs into their life just for a $7,500 tax credit.
After the interviews, we wanted to gain more information about the topic. So we found this study done by Cox Automotive that basically asked potential new EV considerers what their top purchase barriers were. And as you can see, the top one was the fact that they remain too expensive. As we mentioned above, there is a $7,500 tax credit now in 2023, but the real issue is, and what we started asking ourselves, is this enough to sway the decisions of potential buyers, or do they need a larger deduction / more incentives? To provide more research, we gathered data from Wall Street estimates going out to 2026 of top EV models sales. And as you can see, the growth rates are really poor. So the sales projections are not doing well in the next coming years. Top models are expected to grow less than 2%, even negative growth in some years. And this really signals weak demand for EV cars. And so that led us to conclude that the lack of demand can be due to poor incentives for American citizens. The government may need to then raise the deductions for electric vehicles and increase the $7,500 tax credit.
So for the argument to increase the credit, as you can see on the chart on the left, it shows the average U.S. retail transactions by vehicle type. So obviously the electric vehicles are so much more expensive than these gas vehicles. So by this only $7,500 credit, do you think that is enough for these consumers to pay the extra premium for these electric vehicles? And on the right is the US electric vehicle sales monthly. And you can see there's been a steady increase, but as in early 2023, this has been pretty static. And I wonder if consumers are thinking that there needs to be more to really help them incentivize for making this big purchase. And then the argument for no changes in the credit, the electric vehicle market share in the US reached about 8.5%, which is triple 2 years ago. So that shows that with these companies putting more money into making these cars and advertising, that people are getting this awareness and are buying these vehicles. And 14% of all new cars sold were electric vehicles in 2022. So that's furthermore showing that this demand is there. But on the contrary, about 72% of purchases, people who want to purchase these cars buy it for the environmental factor and not for this credit. So increasing the credit might not be the main driver to these purchases.
Okay, so for some more outside research, we asked Google Gemini, the free version, what it thought about the clean vehicle tax credit, what are some of the pros to that, and what are some of the cons to that, and some of the key aspects it provided. In terms of the pros, were that it obviously promotes environmental well-being and sustainable transportation options for people who are looking for that, and economic benefits such as possibly in helping and aiding employment rates. And however, some of the cons to that were it's not accessible to all taxpayers, especially lower income taxpayers who may not be able to incorporate the infrastructure that comes along with purchasing electric vehicles, such as the charging equipment and things that are necessary for that. And just in general, it's too new of a concept, so people aren't switching and they're not making the switch from typical gas vehicles to electric vehicles. So this presents an overall concern with the current policy, and maybe some further considerations need to be made.
We also decided to ask the paid version of ChatGPT to see if there's any major variance. Overall, ChatGPT came to consensus that the initiative is positive and will support the ongoing environmental sustainability goals. One thing to take away is it has a very high ceiling and can stimulate many branches of new opportunities and job creation. In terms of the pros, one unique point was the economic stimulus, where most people might think about the lack of infrastructure or economic support for EVs, but ChatGPT actually believes that this could spark a surge in the economy. Most of the cons seem typical and expected. One unique perspective ChatGPT offers is the market distortion, in the sense that we could see overinvestment and perhaps almost too much positive effects, which might hurt the standard gas industry. We came to the consensus that the tax credit for plug-in and electric vehicles should be increased. One of the biggest reasons for this is because the amount that taxpayers are getting credit is not convincing enough to put them over the fence. As it stands, EVs are less affordable, so coming with that, they need to look to increase the credit to make it an appropriate incentive. Another issue arises with large corporations such as Tesla, which seem to be so dominant in the industry, and this has shown to adversely affect the industry.
So there have been multiple forecasts, including one from S&P Global Mobility, which estimates electric vehicle sales in the US could reach 40% of total passenger car sales by 2030. However, because the current market share of electric vehicles is very low, these projections are dependent on the continuation of effective state government policies and other effective incentives like the clean vehicle tax credit we've been discussing. Most car owners have expressed concern about fuel emission, and a poll showed that 23% of poll respondents would consider purchasing an electric vehicle, which goes to show that the desire for these vehicles is there, but the cost just may be too much for taxpayers, which could be resulting in the low level of sales. And just to wrap everything up, the clean vehicle tax credit we've been discussing is available to individual purchasers to incentivize taxpayers, and more specifically lower and middle income Americans, to invest in these electric vehicles. And this increase in the electric vehicles comes with the potential for many different benefits as well. Apart from the reduction in carbon emissions, the increase could generate demand for labor. But unfortunately, the high costs associated with it seem to suggest that an increase in the credit could make the purchase more feasible for taxpayers, and therefore would make these benefits possible.